People only see what they want to see. And Matthew, my husband, always wanted to see in me a useless woman. He never looked beyond the surface. To him, I was the perfect wife he thought he should have, but only in the social conventions. A wife who stayed at home, busy with house chores, and, in his words, completely dependent. He never knew that behind my walls I was creating something he could never understand. My name is Susan Johnson. I'm 32 years old. And if you looked at me on the streets of Shoreham, a small town in upstate New York, you'd probably think I was just another tired weekend wife, with a calm routine and no great ambitions. Maybe you'd see me walking with Matthew, with our modest car, or even going to the supermarket to buy things for the house. The kind of life that seemed normal to everyone, but you didn't know what was happening when I closed the door to my office. In the silence of my room, in those early hours of the morning while the rest of the house still slept, I worked. Not with the traditional work everyone thought was the right thing for a woman like me, but with something I created from scratch, a digital career. I was a financial content creator, a voice in the midst of chaos, offering tips on how to make money online, manage investments, and create a financially stable life. I started with simple, almost amateurish videos. I learned as I grew. And I grew fast. At first, the numbers weren't impressive, but soon my video channel became something serious. Online courses, monthly subscriptions, and my income grew exponentially. I, who once seemed like an ordinary, ambitionless wife, was running an empire Matthew never knew about. My business was valued at over $1,200,000, but he never knew about it. In fact, he never asked. The married life with Matthew seemed ideal for anyone who didn't look too closely. But within the intimacy of our home, something had been rotting for a long time. He only saw me as the wife who should be fed, supported, and at the end of the day had nothing but a silly smile and an empty look. He didn't see what I was building, because to him, what I did didn't matter. "You don't work, Susan. You just live on that computer as if that pays the bills," he used to say, as if simply being at home was enough to classify me as useless. In those moments, I tried to respond, but he never listened. I knew the subject would never end. The words slipped off him like sand, and all I could do was move forward, ignoring his indifference. He never knew about my fortune. He never knew about the meetings with investors, the sponsorship contracts, or the number of people who actually respected me for what I had accomplished. He simply never wanted to know. I tried, in vain, to show him the importance of my work, but his gaze was always distant, always focused only on his own world. There were nights when he'd come home, tired, and barely look at me. He was convinced that he was the one supporting me. He always said, "You don't do anything, Susan. I work so you can have this life." The phrase cut me deeply, but I didn't react. There was no reason to argue with him. He didn't see, didn't want to see. There was something in him that had transformed over time. The arrogance, the indifference, the disdain. The more I grew, the further he pulled away. I was no longer part of his plans. Or maybe he was just waiting for the right moment to dismiss me, as if I were a broken piece no longer useful for the game. And then, one day, it came. I was in the kitchen making dinner when he walked in, with that look on his face I knew so well. It was the look he wore when he was about to drop a bomb. I looked at him, feeling my heart race, but knowing deep down that something was about to happen. Something I already knew, but that would still hit me with the same force. "It's over, Susan. I don't want to support a useless woman anymore." He said these words with such a cold, definitive tone that he barely seemed like the man I married. The words, like sharp blades, cut through everything left between us. In that moment, something inside me broke. But not in the way he expected. There were no tears, no shouting, just a deep silence. I looked at him and nodded, without hesitation. I had nothing more to say. He didn't want to support the useless woman, but in reality, he never knew that I had already been supporting myself. I stood there, without words, as he waited for a reaction. But my reaction wasn't going to come in that way. I looked at him one last time, feeling no anger or sadness. Just a sharp coldness, a deep emptiness. Deep down, I already knew that this was the end. But what I didn't know, what I never imagined, was what would come next. What I was about to discover in the cruelest, most surprising way, which would leave me speechless. The betrayal. He, the man who despised me, was about to show me in the most painful way possible what it really meant to be left behind. What he didn't know was that I had never been weak. I had simply been waiting for the right moment to transform. And what he couldn't understand was that he was already too late. But I didn't know that yet. Not in that moment. And the truth was about to come out, later, in a way that would make me realize that some things, even when they seem bad, are actually the beginning of something much bigger. What hurts is not the end. It's not the moment when you realize that something has fallen apart. What really cuts, like a sharp blade, is discovering that the end didn't start when you thought it did. It started long before in the shadows, right under your nose, and you were the last to know. That's what destroyed me. It was this revelation that burned every last bit of hope I had left. 2 months after the divorce, the pain had already settled in. Losing Matthew wasn't just about the marriage. It was about losing an entire life that suddenly unraveled. I was trying to move on, trying to find some kind of balance. But then came the stab. And this one wasn't from Matthew. It was from Eleanor. Eleanor, my best friend. The one who said she'd be by my side in the worst moments. The person I thought I could trust. The one who always promised to support me no matter what. She had always been the sister I never had. I remember the times she'd show up at my house to talk, give advice, help me deal with the frustrations of a marriage that, deep down, I already knew was in ruins. But of course, I was blind. I didn't see it. And when you don't see the obvious, it's because the pain hasn't hit yet. It had always been there, the betrayal. But I didn't know. It was a simple notification on my phone that hit me. I was lying on the couch, in the middle of a calm afternoon, trying to respond to some emails about new projects I was developing for my finance platform. Then, the phone vibrated. A notification of a photo posted by a mutual contact. The photo was simple, but destructive. It was Matthew, smiling with Eleanor, their hands intertwined. He was wearing the same blue shirt I gave him for our last wedding anniversary. The same forced smile he used when he wanted to seem happy. But the cruelest part wasn't the smile. It was the fact that it was there, exposed, for me to see. They were together. And the worst part, they were together while we were still married. I froze. The world spun around me, but I couldn't move. I took a deep breath, and on impulse, I dialed Eleanor's number. She answered quickly, as if she had been waiting for the call, or maybe she was trying to prepare herself. "Susan, I didn't want it to be like this," she said, her voice trembling but trying to sound natural. That infuriated me. It was like she was trying to console me for a pain she had caused herself, a pain she knew would be unbearable for me. It wasn't just physical betrayal. It was the fact that she had been my friend, my confidant, the person I thought would never do this to me. How long? My voice came out cold, sharp, like a blade's edge. I needed to know. I needed to understand how far her hypocrisy went. "How long have you been with him?" She hesitated for a second. She didn't know what to say, but the truth was already in the air. "I think 6 months before the end," she replied, her voice low, as if trying to soften the impact of the revelation. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months where I was there beside him, trying to save something that was already dying, while he still slept in my bed, while he still pretended that our married life was worth something. I could only take a deep breath and let out an ironic laugh. "While he still slept in my bed?" I said, and the pain in my voice was mixed with anger. "While I was there, waiting for him to tell me what was happening, you were in his bed, right? And I'm the fool, right, Eleanor?" Silence. The call felt like it was happening in slow motion. I could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying. She had no excuse. There was no justification that could be enough. They had laughed at me. They had fun with my naivety. Matthew used to call me the saint of the internet, as if it were some kind of joke, as if being an honest, hard-working, and dedicated person was something to ridicule. And Eleanor always spoke of me as if I were a burden. as if my life were stagnant, as if I would never be capable of changing. But what they didn't know, what they would never understand, was that I was already changing, and I was changing quietly, as I always had. I had never been weak nor foolish. I was never that woman who needed to be saved, or the one who depended on others to define her happiness. They thought hurting me, leaving me behind, would be the end of me. But it was far from the end. It was just the beginning. I already knew, I said with an unsettling calm. I saw you two. I saw what you were doing. And now, Eleanor, I know everything. She was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words, but I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I already knew what was behind all that facade. Matthew and Eleanor had despised me, made me feel like I was useless, a woman with no value. But what they didn't see was that a woman's value is not in what others think of her, but in what she makes of herself. Do you think you hurt me, Eleanor? My voice was icy. I already knew what was happening. And you knew too. But you chose to look me in the eyes and lie to me while calling me saint. What's more ridiculous? You betraying me with him, or you thinking I wouldn't see all of this happening? The silence on the other end was overwhelming. She had no more words to say. Not because she didn't have something to say, but because she knew that nothing could fix what had been broken. She was no longer my friend. She was just another lie. And then I hung up. There was nothing left to discuss. I didn't need any more explanations. What mattered to me now was the future. What Matthew and Eleanor didn't know was that, by pushing me down, they had given me the strength I needed to rise up stronger. I was already changing, and revenge. Revenge would be sweet. And while they laughed at me, while they thought my pain would be eternal, the truth was something else. I was just beginning to discover what it really meant to be free. They thought they had defeated me, but, in reality, they had only given me the push I needed to reinvent myself. Sometimes a woman's silence is the loudest sound in the world. It is the deafening scream that echoes in the void, breaking down all walls and reflecting in every decision made. Silence is not weakness. It is a strategic choice. And in my case, it was the best choice I could have made. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in public. I didn't ask for explanations. Nothing. I simply observed. Deep down, I already knew what I needed to do. Instead of getting lost in a sea of emotions, in a desperate search for answers, I invested. In myself. I stayed there, quiet, allowing the pieces of the game to fall into place around me. Every move Matthew and Eleanor made, every mistake they made, was an opportunity for me. But I wasn't chasing them. I was rebuilding myself. I renovated my apartment. I started with the kitchen, which before had just been a functional space. Now every corner had something that reflected who I was becoming. Modern, elegant, determined. The sofa, which used to be a pile of pillows and blankets thrown haphazardly, was now a spotless, planned, comfortable space. Every detail in the decor was a reflection of the woman I was becoming. Something solid, lasting. And I knew that this space would be a sanctuary where I would create my new life. I bought new clothes. Not the cheap, boring pieces I used to wear, but pieces that made me feel powerful, as if I could dominate any situation. A dark gray wool blazer, a black dress that fit my body impeccably, high-heeled sandals that made me walk with confidence, as if I were always prepared for a big event. I didn't need approval from anyone, just from myself. Then I traveled to the Amalfi Coast, because sometimes you need a new setting, a new perspective, to truly understand who you are. The crystal-clear blue sea, the cliffs falling to the Mediterranean, the narrow, charming streets. Everything made me feel that there was something much bigger waiting for me. The Italian nights, with sophisticated dinners by the sea, while the scent of fresh lemon filled the air, reminded me that life wasn't about staying stuck in a past that no longer served me. And it was on that trip, surrounded by beauty and tranquility, that I made a decision. Something had changed inside me. I would start recording bolder videos, more honest ones. I would let go of the rehearsed lines, the artificial smiles, and speak directly to the women listening to me, as if I were a friend, a confidant. I no longer wanted to be just a content creator. I wanted to be an authentic woman, showing the world what I was capable of doing without fear of judgment. The videos started to explode. I talked about finance, about empowerment, about financial independence. I spoke about how when you dedicate yourself to something with your whole heart, the results come, sooner or later. The response was immediate. My follower count tripled. I wasn't talking about what people wanted to hear anymore. I was talking about what they needed to hear. And that made all the difference. And of course, my bank account followed the same path. Sponsorship deals started coming in. Investors began reaching out to me. I was creating a real support network around me. Meanwhile, Matthew and Eleanor continued their charade. Eleanor, with her Chanel bags and dinners in Miami, posted everything on social media. I could see the expensive parties, the dinners that cost more than the rent of the house I grew up in. I knew what was happening. She was living in a bubble of superficial luxury, unaware that it was all just a facade. But there was something she still didn't know, something I knew that would make all the difference. Matthew, with all his charm and his facade of stability, was sinking. He was good at pretending to be in control, but I knew that all the money they were spending came from loans. It wasn't his money. It was credit he had taken out to maintain the lifestyle that Eleanor demanded. His salary didn't cover half the luxury she insisted on having. I knew this because, while I was married to him, I had learned how to read the numbers. I knew how investments worked, how loans were made. He was using his own name and reputation to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. But the debts were piling up, and soon this would come to light. It was only a matter of time. While Eleanor flaunted her luxury, unaware of what was behind the smokescreen, I was preparing for the right moment. For the moment when everything would crumble for them. And that moment was coming, faster than they could imagine. Then, one night, while I was in my apartment, with a glass of red wine and my laptop open in front of me, a message appeared on the screen. The name I dreaded. Matthew. He wrote, "Susan, I know things didn't end well, but I want you to know that I still think about you. I can't keep living this lie with Eleanor. I miss you." The smile that appeared on my face wasn't one of joy, but something deeper, more calculated. Revenge was coming. And this message was just the first step. I knew what he wanted. He wanted to come back. He wanted to reclaim what he thought he could lose without consequences. But I knew that, at that moment, the one who really had the power was me. I didn't reply. I just closed the laptop and looked out the window. The future was finally starting to align, and I was ready to take the next step. They thought they had destroyed me. But what they didn't know was that, by pushing me down, they gave me the strength to rise. I was about to turn the tables, and when Matthew and Eleanor found out, it would be too late. Those who live for appearances eventually trip over the mirror. I always knew that. After all, I've always been someone who preferred sincerity, no matter how harsh, over the facade of a happiness that didn't exist. Matthew was a master at maintaining an illusion, an image of stability that, for a long time, deceived me. But deep down, I knew the truth was there, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It was him, Matthew. The man who, for years, was the center of my world. The man who made me believe I wasn't enough. The man who despised me, threw away our life together, and chased a lie, believing it would be easier to digest. Now he was back, trying to trap me again. The message he sent me was simple, but full of unspoken meanings. "Hi, Sue. Can we talk?" I took a few seconds to respond, feeling the anger rise inside me. As if the things he had done weren't enough, but I held back. I took a deep breath and typed, "Something wrong with Eleanor?" The reply came almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for it. She's not what I thought. I need you. I need you." As if everything were that simple. As if the pain he caused could be fixed with a few words. But he didn't know what was happening. He didn't know what I had built while he sank into the lie he had chosen to live. My business had been valued again that week. Almost $2 million. Something I achieved on my own. And as an early birthday present to myself, I had just bought what I had always dreamed of, a white Porsche Panamera. It was my symbol of freedom, of power, of transformation. I knew what he wanted. He wanted to rise again at my expense, as if I were just a convenient memory. But he didn't know me anymore, not the way he thought he did. "I'm going to find you," I replied coldly, colder than I had ever been with him. "And I hope you understand what's going on here." I hung up the phone and grabbed the key to my car. The drive to the house where Matthew now lived with Eleanor was silent. The sound of the Porsche's engine was almost a melody to my ears. When I arrived, I parked in front of the old, worn-out house. It wasn't the place I imagined for him. It was more a reflection of what he had become, worn out, broken. But I was there for a reason. I needed to see how far he could fall, to see what was left of him. Eleanor answered the door. The woman I had once considered my friend. The woman who, now, was the partner of a man who, for months, had laughed behind my back. She was pale, no makeup, and for some reason that didn't make me feel any sympathy. She looked fragile, as if the facade she had tried to maintain was crumbling right before my eyes. She looked at me with a surprised expression, perhaps even a little shame. But I was no longer interested in her justifications. There was no more room for this story. "Susan," she started, her voice trembling as if she were about to explain something. But before she could say more, I raised my hand. I didn't need her words. What I needed was for Matthew to speak, what he had done to get to this point. "I just came to talk to Matthew," I said, giving no space for anything else. She hesitated but stepped aside and let me in. The smell of mildew and dust filled my nostrils. The place was far from what I remembered. Now, it seemed so small, so insignificant, as if everything he had accumulated over the years had dissipated in the blink of an eye. Matthew was on the couch, wrinkled clothes, a defeated expression. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that wasn't pride or anger. It was just regret. But that regret, for me, was too little, too late. "I messed up. I lost everything. You were the only real thing I had," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. I stood there, watching him. It was strange. The man who once made me feel like I wasn't enough was now there, asking for what he thought he had lost. But somehow there was no more room for him in my heart. There was no place for this fake regret anymore. He closed his eyes, and as if he couldn't bear the weight of what he had done, he let himself fall back on the couch, his head tilting to the side. I could feel the tension in the air. He was waiting for some reaction from me. He expected me to forgive him. He expected me to take him back, as if the simple fact that he admitted his mistake would be enough to erase everything he had done. I walked closer to him. I gently ran my hand over his face. He closed his eyes as if that touch was the last thing he had expected. For a moment, something inside me hesitated. A part of me thought about going back, about giving him the forgiveness he was begging for. A part of me wanted to believe that the story we had lived together could be saved. But then, I remembered everything. I remembered how he looked at me that day, as if I were just an option. I remembered how he despised me. I remembered everything he said to me. "You'll never be anything, Susan." How he looked at me with an indifference that shattered my heart. How he laughed at my dedication to my work, to my future. No, I couldn't go back anymore. The woman he knew was dead. The woman he destroyed was no longer there. In her place stood someone much stronger, someone who didn't need him, not anymore. My answer was simple, but definitive. "You lost me. And now it's too late to fix it." The pain he felt upon hearing those words was clear, but it didn't touch me. I knew that by turning my back on him, I was finally turning the page of my life. Some lessons come at a high cost. Others are priceless. Matthew, I never imagined it would come to this. When we met, we were young, idealistic, thinking the world would be our stage and life would be an endless construction of dreams. But over time, you taught me many things. Perhaps the hardest lessons came from you. You were the one who showed me, in practice, what it truly meant to be inferior, to be a dependent woman, To be the one who had to hide behind a failed marriage, behind empty words. But now something had changed in me. I was no longer the woman you had known. I was no longer the woman willing to sacrifice myself for us. Now it was about me. I had learned the lessons, and unlike you, I wasn't leaving them behind. The cool afternoon wind cut across my face as I stared directly at him, not blinking, not looking away. He stood there, pale, red eyes, trying to make me feel something, anything for the pain he was expressing. But nothing. I didn't feel anything for him anymore, nothing but a slight disdain. You taught me the value of money, Matthew. My voice sounded soft, almost harmless, but deep down, there was a strength that came from a place deep within me. He looked at me as if the words I had just spoken were the key to some salvation he believed he could still obtain. "Susan, please?" he begged, his eyes lost, trying to cling to something, anything. But for me, there was nothing left, nothing worth rescuing. I stared at him with a calmness that surprised me, but deep down, I knew it was exactly what he deserved. He thought he still had power over me, that he could reverse things with one more of his empty words, with an apology that was nothing more than an attempt to restore his wounded pride. I didn't move, but I looked straight into his eyes, and the silence between us was louder than any shout. I took a deep breath and continued. But now it's my turn. I'm going to teach you the value of dignity. The words came out firm. He could feel the change in me. He could see that the woman he had known and despised was no longer there. There was no more room for the mistakes he had made, no more room for the games he tried to play with people around him, as if he were in control of everything. I knew he wanted a reaction. He wanted to see me falter. He wanted me to give in, even if just for a moment. But I was far beyond that. And he knew it. I turned my back on him without hesitation, without looking back. Each step I took was a symbol of how much I had grown. I didn't need approval from anyone anymore. And what fascinated me the most was the feeling of freedom I had. The feeling that, finally, I was free from all the chains that Matthew and Eleanor had tried to bind me with. This was the right moment, the moment I had waited for. I got into the Porsche, turned the key in the ignition, and started the engine slowly, deliberately, so he could hear it. I knew he was there, standing, waiting for something to happen. Maybe he still thought I'd come back. Maybe he was expecting me to make a scene, to say something that would leave him feeling guilty. But no. The only sound he would hear at that moment would be the roar of my car's engine, growing slowly, as if each growl was a sentence. The noise of the engine echoed through the air. He was there, standing at the door of the house he now shared with Eleanor. I only saw him for a moment, but it was enough to know he was losing everything. What he wanted most was slipping away, and with it, any trace of control he believed he still had over my life. Eleanor appeared at the door, her face pale, as if the weight of what was happening was starting to fall on her. There was no longer that confidence, that sparkle in her eyes that she had displayed in the days when I thought we were friends. Now she seemed just a shadow, someone who was there but didn't know what to do with the pain that was about to knock on her door. She stood still, watching as the car slowly drove away. I looked at her, but I didn't feel the need to say anything. I didn't need to. The silence once again was all I needed. I passed slowly by the house, and when I was right in front of the entrance where Matthew was still standing, perhaps waiting for a sign of regret, I did what no one expected. I honked, twice. Short and direct, like a warning. Something to remind him that his story and mine had come to an end. Something to make him understand that there was no turning back. That for him, there was no longer a place in my heart. And more importantly, there was no more space in my life. And then, I left. I went on my way. I continued my journey. But that goodbye wasn't just for Matthew. It was also for myself. It was the closing of a chapter that took longer than I would have liked, but was finally coming to an end. I knew this story wouldn't end there. Because some victories need to be shared, especially among women. What Matthew and Eleanor didn't know was that, while they were immersed in the superficial, I had created something much more solid. And the best part, I wasn't alone. Every step I took now, every victory I achieved was something I could share with other women who, like me, were learning to rise. They were learning to recognize themselves. They were learning to find their dignity. I knew my revenge wasn't just mine. It was a collective revenge. It was a celebration of female power, of empowerment that comes from independence and self-love. It was no longer about Matthew. It was no longer about Eleanor. It was about all the women who, like me, were breaking free from the invisible chains that tried to hold us. And as I drove away from their house, with the Porsche gliding down the road, I knew the world was now mine. I had control, and more importantly, I had my dignity. It didn't just survive, it thrived. I clearly remember the day I made the decision to change, that turning point, where pain no longer had power over me, where I finally realized that life would no longer be a sentence, but a chance for a fresh start. Everything I had lost, everything that had been taken from me, became fuel for something much bigger than any betrayal or farewell. Something stronger than any open wound, more powerful than any lie told. I turned the pain into power. I turned every tear into fuel to keep moving forward. And somehow I was able to make the betrayal my greatest profit.